I met Wesley at our Man Reach retreat that we do every year. The Man Reach retreat is just an MSM retreat, but I found that his presentation was just information that I had never heard as a man who has sex with men. And I think that many of the gay men in our community need to hear this message. I also was really, really interested in his approach in terms of utilizing treatment as prevention, PEP and PrEP, as part of the total picture of reducing our community viral load. Wesley comes to us from Charlotte, North Carolina. He works in the Rosedale infectious disease clinic up there, and I'm going to let you, like I said, Butch didn't give me a Vita. I've seen it online. It's about 3 pages long. He's the most knowledgeable person that I've ever heard speak about current trends. So I'm going to turn it over to him right now. I think you'll really enjoy his presentation. Thank you for all coming tonight.
Not mine. Yeah. All right, is that better? Can you hear me now? All right. Yeah, and I have to pace a little bit, so because I'll get into the moment and forget where I'm at. So standing behind this thing kind of makes me nervous. So I was going to talk about PrEP, PEP, and TASP, and I will. And I had a PowerPoint presentation, and then I talked to Butch, and he's like, you know, with the crowd probably would do better if I just talk like I do at the Man Reach conference. So no PowerPoint presentation tonight. I want to talk a little bit about how I got into HIV and the history of HIV. A lot of people don't know how far we've come with where it came from. How I got into HIV, and next year will be 30 years that I've been taking care of HIV patients. I started during my training at Duke. And the first thing was that I had to go and draw blood on a patient, and in 1984, before I started school, I was a phlebotomist there, and they made us put complete jumpsuits on, respirators, masks, shields. It looked like we were going to the moon. And this fella was clearly, he was already pretty low in his spirits, and that just felt wrong to me. So that really started my journey then. I was scared to death. As a gay white man, I didn't want anybody to think I had HIV. They wouldn't nobody to have sex with me. And I was still kind of pouring it up then. I hadn't met my partner of 28 years yet. So I graduated, I saw patients during my training, and then I graduated in 87, July 87 I graduated, and began to practice medicine, and then that's the year that AZT came out, was the fall of 1987. And I advertised in our local newspaper, then it was called Front Page, it was a gay newspaper for North Carolina, I was in the Raleigh-Durham area. And I worked for Kaiser Permanente, and I put an ad in there that, openly gay providers, looking for new people to if they want to see a gay provider, they can come see me. Well, that just opened the floodgates, and I started seeing a lot of patients. And that first week after the article came out, a gay white male came to me, had AIDS. Nobody really had HIV then, everybody had AIDS. And he wanted me to take care of him. I was like, no, you got to go down the hall and see the infectious disease guy. I don't want to do that. And then the next week, I had another guy, same thing. You'll see a pattern here. And I sent him down to see Dr. Cromartie, the infectious disease guy. And then that same second week, the third guy came. And he's sitting there, strawberry blonde, sitting on about 130 pounds. And I said, no, you're going to have to go down the hall. And he stopped and he said, Wesley, don't you know me? And I looked, and I tend to like my guys a little stockier, so I put 100 pounds on him, and I realized this was somebody I had dated 10 years earlier. And of course, my heart then just went straight to him. I hugged him, and I started to cry, and I said, absolutely. That was, to me, it was that moment was my knock 3 times, and that was and I found my mission field. I'd always thought I was going to go into the mission field. I studied French in high school and Chinese in college, and I was just convinced that was the mission field. Little did I know that my own backyard was my mission field. So, and it's been great. I have been amazed because when I started, basically I held a lot of hands and I attended a lot of funerals. And then medicines came out and they were quite toxic, so then I was still doing that. When we finally had effective therapy in 1995, that is when we finally figured out 3 drugs were what we need. Those were the days of Combivir and Crixivant. And all of a sudden, everybody, their viral loads dropped, CD4s went up, and the skeletons of the Castro gained weight. Of course, it was a little bit of a problem because people had sold their life insurance to the Viatical companies, and now they had to live, But it's been great because now I don't really hold hands and go to funerals except for the very old. Now I'm attending weddings and baby showers, and that's just such a great miracle. Which, if you think about it, 1995, we haven't even had effective therapy for 20 years yet. When I started, there was a group called the Multi-Center AIDS Cohort Study Group. I'll call it the MAC group. The MAC group in 1985 stated if you have AIDS, you have approximately 18 months to live. And that's what we told patients. And we would, of course, we'd say, all right, go ahead, go do drugs, have fun, you're going to die. And that's what, we really just said that. Just enjoy yourself. This is it. But some survived, and then medicines came out. And so in 1997, the MAC group said, these medications, we probably can give our patients a decade more of life. Well, those of us practicing HIV medicine felt like gods. Not just because we came from Duke, but we felt like gods. We gave them a decade. So we didn't care about your cholesterol, we didn't care about diabetes, we didn't care about your depression. We just gave you a decade. And of course, then more new medicines come out. And each time the medicines come out, we kept teasing out the side effects. And it went from 16 pills a day and 19 pills a day down to 2 and 3. And now, as you all know, we just had our 4th 1 pill a day come out. And we'll have another one out next year if we're lucky. One of our sponsors, Janssen, is in the works right now to be a Truvada-resistant Norvir, so it'll be our first boosted PI regimen that'll be all in one. So in 2007, the MAX group came back again and said, you know what, our patients probably can live 20 more years. Well, there you go. That's time enough to graduate, get married, have a baby. So 2 decades. But it didn't stop there. In 2010, the MAC group broke with their 10-year cycle and they said, they got kind of cocky. They said, our patients probably have 26.4 more years to live. So again, there's a quarter century. You can do a lot in a quarter century. But January 2012, the MAX group, and that's the last time they've spoken, as far as I'm aware, they said, we have enough data. Now HIV is like every other medical condition. It's treatable, manageable, and it does not shorten our patients' lives. Provided they don't step out in front of the city bus or pick up a crack pipe, it does not shorten their life. They can live a full life. And so I think that's a big thing for us to remember. And I say that because I want people to realize it's like diabetes, it's like hypertension. If we can get past the stigma piece that really drags our CD4s down, our immune system gets dragged down by our own personal stress, that internalized stigma that you feel like, I've got the HIV, I've got my house in Virginia. And we have to change our mentality. Think about it. We've reclaimed the word queer. It now stands for so much more than just lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and everything that fits in there. We have to understand words have power. We no longer say the N word, the K word, the F word, the C word. We don't use these words because while they're valid words, they are hurtful. So you have to think about the language that you use when you talk about your HIV. We in the medical field, especially the HIV providers, we no longer say you're infected with HIV. Because the word infected is a stigmatizing word inside of you. It makes you feel dirty. And while HIV is a virus, I will remind you, many of you know that cervical cancer, penile cancer, and anal cancer are all infections. So we don't have to say, well, we're making an exception for HIV. No, you never hear, I'm infected with anal cancer. You don't hear that. It's like, I got anal cancer, or I have. So I tell people, use that language. I'm living with HIV, or I have HIV. But I say that, but I will tell you that a sister girl the other day at a lecture I was giving in Fayetteville really taught me something. And I said, I was doing the same little spiel, and I said, you're living with HIV. And she says, Mr. West, I'm not living with HIV. HIV's living with me because I'm in charge. And I really like that mentality. So I've immediately adopted that, and I tell everybody, and she really made me smile, and I even sent her a thank you note that she's improved my lectures, because I get to quote her. So a little bit about HIV, just the history, and then I'll talk to you about PrEP, PEP, TASP, and I know it's kind of a big room, but I always enjoy interaction, so if you have questions, or if I say something, and if you're like my partner who's got a little bit of dementia, he can't remember to get to the end of the lecture to say this question. If you've got a little bit of that HIV neurocognitive, go ahead and yell it out. I deal with it all the time. So, how many of you know where HIV came from? This is how good we've gotten. We know where it came from now. We know exactly where it was in Africa. We know about a 30-year window when it crossed over into humans. So, anybody know that story already? Or do we just... All right, so here we go. And how we figured this out also is we also looked at, I'll tell you how we figured out the viruses and where it is, which will lead me a little bit into why vaccines are so incredibly hard for HIV. So, looking at the HIV genome, that's all the genes that go into it. It has about 9,779 codons in it. We have been able to separate those two into almost identical strips that come from two monkeys that were used as protein source in Africa. Just like we use chickens, cows, and pigs, they use monkeys for their protein source. It was in Cameroon, and it was very isolated. You know, at the time, when it was there, we estimate between 1887 and 1950 is when we think it crossed. Some people push that to 1930, depending on which regressive model you use. And it was pretty self-contained in the little villages, and we estimate 1 or 2 villages at most had it. But then something happened in Africa. Western culture brought gasoline. Gasoline brought roads and trucks. Roads and trucks let the villages connect, and in Africa, it's very common that if I come to do business in that town, a gentleman there that I'm doing business with would offer his wife or a sister or one of his daughters to make sure I wasn't lonely that night. And that happens village after village after village. So, of course, that's how the virus spread. And then planes brought it to us. The first documented case we have in Africa is 1959. There was a doctor there, a Congolese doctor, that died of some slimming disease, as they called it. They had the wherewithal to freeze parts of his brain, parts of other organs, and when we went back and looked at that in 1995, we found HIV virus in 1959. And that's important because that virus, HIV mutates every year by 1%. So if you're living with HIV for 10 years, I won't even get into how it mutates into multiple other species within you and why that sometimes our medicines can fail, not as often as they used to, but that 1% change each year is why we can't have a vaccine. But when we look, we can look at that and we see where our today's HIV is, and we look at that 1959 version, look at that genetic code, and we see how much it's spread out, or what we call genetic drift. And we can go backwards with that, and that allows us to now estimate where it came from, looking at that. That's how it got into the human population. So, first known case in Africa was 1959. Is that a question?
Kind of a comment.
Okay.
I hope I don't mean to detract, but like how we're talking about not using stigmatic words like infection and so forth. I am African, and it's more of the fact that Westernization came in and people were working in mining areas and other places to work, and they were removed from the villages and going out and utilizing what we call today sex workers. There are some ethnic groups that do have some of the practices that you're sharing, but that isn't that common, particularly in Cameroon, because I'm from that region. It's really more about kind of like how we have here. If the guys, what do the guys do when they're off in the military, in the army? It's true, right? I mean, it's the same kind of thing. You're away from home, you're away from your woman, you do your thing, and it's spread that way. I just don't want stigma where people think that, oh, it's just commonplace that the majority of people were getting their wives and daughters off for sex.
Excellent point. And I didn't go quite into all the details. She brings up a very good point that was also there were sex workers involved, and that while this is a practice in some spots, it's not common to all of Cameroon. That's absolutely correct. So onward, the earliest case we have in America is 1968. A lot of us don't hear about that. We know about the 8 guys that were listed in the last page of the New York Times, about 8 guys in 1981 with this weird cancer. Actually, we have a guy, a 16-year-old boy from St. Louis who died in 1968 of PCP pneumonia. We also preserved parts of his body and blood as well. The first case in Europe was in Oslo, Norway, 1971. So it's been around for a while. And it was it was scary to be. I was just hitting my sexual prime, getting out of into my 20s when the 1981 story broke, and I remember being so scared about it. We had 8 guys with these unusual cancers. The next month, the article was 41 guys, and again, it was in Los Angeles and San Francisco, and it began to drift down. The first case we had at Duke was in 1983, and it was a young man that worked for American Airlines. And he did not make it. That was unfortunate. It was tough times. So Now you know where HIV comes from. Let's talk about where we're going with HIV. I've already mentioned to you why it's so hard for us to come up with a vaccine. We have worked, and we're continuing to work on vaccines, but we just don't have the technology. This is not the only virus or bacterium that we have that we can't come up with a vaccine for. Herpes has been around a lot longer. We don't have a vaccine yet for herpes. We don't have a vaccine for hepatitis C. A lot of people ask me about that, and if you look, hepatitis C is also an RNA virus, just like HIV is. Hepatitis A and B, we have vaccines. Some of them are just easier. And the fact that HIV is so the way it mutates so quickly and such a rapid reproducer, well, actually, we do the work for it. I'm sure you guys know that. HIV can't make more of itself. It tricks us into making more of us. The way it attaches to our T cells, our CD4s, it injects its material, and there's genetic material, and our messenger RNA goes, oh, hi, you look like us. Come on into the nucleus, and we'll make a home for you. And then we start doing all the work. That's why we measure CD4s, because the virus pushes our CD4 so hard to make so many copies of itself. One HIV viron will make 2 million copies of itself within 7 hours before the original, the mama one, dies off. So it's a lot of pressure on the CD4. So when we see those go down, that's why we use that as a measure to see how well your health is. And of course, the viral load is the other thing. I will remind people, I now have the holy trinity of HIV, and that is CD4s are important, but as we're aging, everything sags after 50, not just your belly button boobs, but your CD4s also sag. But your CD4 percentage it doesn't sag. And I tell people that because you could have a CD4 of 500 this morning, start your period this afternoon, and it'll be 350 tonight. Or I could beat you up and it would drop 150 points. Or you could catch a cold and it would drop. So you have to remember, they go up and down like your blood sugar. But like we do hemoglobin A1Cs, they tell you the previous 3 months of sugar control. Your CD4 percentage tells me the previous 3 months of your health. So you always need to know all three. So if your CD4 jumps around, that's fine. But if your CD4 percentage is flat or rising, then you're actually getting better. One example is a CD4 of 700 at 22% is not completely good. But a CD4 of 500 at 40% is excellent. So 200 less CD4s, but the percentage is up in the normal range. It's always good to have those three, CD4 percentage, and viral load. Those three, I can tell you a lot about yourself when I see them. So, now that we're moving a little bit into the labs and HIV, let's talk a little bit about what is PrEP, what is PEP, and what is TASP. I'm going to go backwards and start with TASP, treatment as prevention. Now, Vancouver in 2006 was really at the cutting edge, and it soon moved out of Canada and into the United States, followed by Seattle, Boston, Baltimore, D.C. Many other cities did this. They believed that if you lower the community viral load, meaning you get everybody on medicines, that fewer people would pick up HIV. And indeed, that is exactly what happened. They saw declines. That's where we got the treatment as prevention or test and treat model. Now, that's been taken a little bit further, and Africa then picked it up, and their whole goal was, and when I was at World AIDS in 2008, their mission was 15 million on ARV, on their medicines, by 2015. And they're on track. They're going to make it. And it's exciting. They've seen, South Africa has finally seen a drop in the number of new cases, that has not happened until the last year or two. So I'm very tickled with what they're doing, and I'm happy to see what we're doing here in America. With the exception of the age group 13 to 34, we've seen a drop in every category of HIV. I think that's exciting. One of the other interesting pieces, now my patient population, in 2000, if I added up everybody in the room's age, it was 32 when I took an average. Now the average age of my patient in 2010 was 46. So I love that. People are, we're all getting older together. Yeah. In America, we are guesstimating around June or July of 2015, over half of everybody living in America will be over 50. And now we have a whole new thing we have to think about. I just told you about the max group saying you could live a full life, and in the beginning we didn't think about it. But now we have HIV on board, and we have to think about diabetes and high blood pressure, and everything else that goes into living a longer life. So that can be challenging. One of the things in the breakout group today, I heard two key words that the treatment of HIV really has to involve. And I consider them three circles. One circle is HIV. Another circle is substance abuse, and another circle is mental health. I can tell you those three, you cannot practice HIV medicine without embracing mental health and substance abuse. Yes, sir?
being that you said that, I wanted to ask a question that takes us back to a statement that you made earlier. When you mentioned that the HIV virus mutated like 1% a year, for someone who's been living, for someone that the HIV virus has been living with for more than 20 years, would you say that, would that affect if they're dealing with the treatment in a holistic way, or psychiatric drugs or mental health, something to balance them, chemically balance them, all right, would you say that in that 10 to 20 year span when the virus mutates, would it affect them on a chemical level where they also need to readjust their mental health medication or their psychiatric medication?
What the gentleman was asking me is, over a 20-year period of having HIV, does this mutating virus maybe change the need for psychiatric medicines to be changed as well? And that's a great question. I don't have a quick answer for that. But you did remind me of one thing. When I talked about the virus mutating, I don't mean that it's mutating to where medicines don't work. These are other subtle changes within the genetic code, so I want to make sure I didn't mislead anybody on that. This doesn't mean you need new medicines, but for example, that would be a 20% change from the base or the original model that he had. Let me see now, where was I? I do that sometimes, I get lost in my thoughts. TASK, treatment as prevention, yes. So they showed that across the, we've seen it now, so that really has led us to where we are. Oh, I'm sorry, I got to Africa where they're 15 million on by 2015, and they're succeeding. And we're trying very hard here to make sure we get everybody into care as well. And treatment, I have to really talk about both before you get HIV, that's PrEP, after you get it, and then what if you're exposed but you don't have it? That's post-exposure. These are all tools that we use, and I want to talk about each of them for a little bit. Let's talk first about post-exposure prophylaxis. This is where someone gets exposed through a needle stick or IV drug use or a sexual event, some other event, splashed fluid, and from a surgical procedure, anything like that. For a long time, people were believing that, just get started on the medicines as soon as you can, and it'll be fine. Well, the newest data, and even Europe has changed their guidelines now. We want you to start it within hours, not days. At 24 hours, you drop below 90% effectiveness. If you want above 90% effectiveness, you start within 12 hours. And if you want 99% effectiveness, start within 2 hours. At 72 hours, which is still part of the guidelines, you only have 36% effectiveness. I wouldn't want those odds. So if you practice medicine, or if you're in contact with anybody that works with post-exposure, you're going to see those guidelines changing, but really we have to focus on getting it started much earlier. Now, of those people that have started on post-exposure prophylaxis within the first 24 hours, how many people have ended up positive anyway? None. So we can't really do a clinical trial to see if it works or not work, but I can tell you, nobody is seroconverted. Do they need it for a full 30 days? I don't know. Maybe not, but yes, ma'am.
I have a question. You talked about it being difficult for the vaccine because there are basically a lot of components in the gene and how it has so many components to it. I have heard that some people have a resistant HIV gene, and I can't remember exactly what it was called. But, there's a really well-known man
Yes.
who had cancer. I'm curious because I had a baby, and me and my partner were both positive, but she is negative. And it was because they put her on ART. I was on it for 3 hours through IV. She had it as soon as she was born. She had it, and she's negative. And they told me, a very renowned doctor who researches all over, told me she will not have it unless she goes out and she takes it herself. So my curiosity is, if they have that much done, wouldn't it be that close? Did you know those components?
That's a great question. I don't know if everybody heard what she was asking. It was about the different components of HIV and its mutating ability and our inability to have a vaccine. Let me back up. She makes a couple good points. Since we're talking about treatment, if two HIV-positive individuals on no medicine, so they have a detectable viral load, decide to conceive of a baby, what's the percentage the baby will be positive? 25%. That's as high as it goes. So two positive people don't necessarily have a positive baby. If you put them on medicines, if both of them are undetectable, the risk is minimal. Not minimal, sorry. It's non-existent. 1 in 6 million. So there are reasons that, it could be that the baby was effectively treated, and so any virus that might have crossed over was captured, as she mentioned, or it could be that their baby was negative all along, which is kind of exciting to know that we've dropped that down so low that I think in 2010 we only had a handful of babies in the nation born positive, and those were only to mothers who didn't take medicine or didn't know they were positive until they were delivering. Now, PrEP. This is a hot button, and I want to talk about it. I think that PrEP is an important tool. It's not the only tool. And I've heard a lot of people, a lot of controversy. There are challenges in discussing it, challenges in funding for it. The first thing that I like to remind people is, yes, there are going to be people that abuse the use of Truvada like they abuse alcohol, or they abuse the speed limit, or they drink and drive. There always is going to be somebody that abuses whatever system we have in place. That's just the nature of human beings. However, the one thing that a lot of people don't seem to understand is there are a lot of women in this country who have to sacrifice their personal safety so that their children will have a home or have warm meals. Many men want condomless sex, and women forego their own health. Truvada empowers women, and if no other reason, it should be approved for that. Now, having said that, I don't see any reason why it can't be used, and I've heard all the stories, and I promised I would only say Truvada whore once. Yes, there's going to be some guys that are going to abuse it. In my clinic, I'm one of the only clinics in Charlotte that's writing it. I have about 2,300 HIV-positive patients and another 700 or 800 LGBTQ and everything in between. Of those people that I have, about 102 right now, I don't know if my partner has put anybody on this past week, but that was the count that I got when I was coming here. 44 of those are women in committed relationships with a positive partner. So that sort of throws a kink into who's asking for it. Of my 102, 6 or 7 are single guys. The rest are in committed serodiscordant relationships, one positive, one negative. So I think that some of the noise that's being made about this is the same noise we made about birth control. Oh, birth control is going to turn women into whores. No. It just empowered women to be as sexually free as we men have always been. So I think there's some sexism that goes into the use of that. So I don't know where PrEP's going to go. I would like to think that it's going to really take off. I know that the makers of PrEP, which is Gilead, are currently not advertising its use because they're trying to wait for the political maelstrom to slow down and us to see really how it shakes out. Yes, sir?
I'm not going to keep taking you back, but you made some very strong statements in the front of your presentation about where HIV began. Do you have any resources where I can read and research this information?
Yes, actually, I hate to be so pat about it, but Wikipedia has a great page on just put HIV history, and almost everything I've said will be there. You can also, what was the other site I like to use? I'll have to think about that. There's one that I like that I reference a lot, but it's on the internet. You can find it with no problem. Did I see a hand over here? Oh, okay.
Is the notion of AIDS kind of related to what you're saying about the past with the AIDS epidemic, where they were showing the spider monkeys or whatever, but also, I want to know a little bit more about the situation where we're going into the PrEP movement, where I'm a gay man and I want to know if my partner is going to be 100% not bulletproof, but knowing that he's going to be shielded in somewhat way, whether he uses condom or not.
Okay. The gentleman in the front was asking about the use of PrEP and his partner being protected if he's with an HIV-negative partner. And that's a great segue into the IPREX study and the partner study. Let me talk about those for a few minutes. And that's actually part of how we segued into using PrEP. IPREX is the study for PrEP. The partner study was a study that surprised us all. It was presented by Dr. Allison Rogers in March of this year at the CROI, the Conference on Retroviruses and Opportunistic Infections. This was a group where we followed 1,140 couples. It's still ongoing, by the way. And in those 1,140 couples, 60% were straight, 40% were gay couples. They were committed. Any couple that had play buddies or had an open relationship or there was any outside partners, they were excluded. So there were 1,140 that remained committed during this trial period. And in the 2-year period, of course, let me say, one partner is positive and on their medicines and keeping their viral load undetectable. And in the trial, it was less than 200, not less than 50 or 20, depending on what you use around here. The other was an HIV negative partner, male and female. No condoms were used. Now, this was an observational study. We couldn't tell them not to do that. It wouldn't be ethical. So we followed them for 2 years. 32,000 episodes of vaginal and rectal intercourse going all the way. Full ejaculation, this was not, pull out or, no, it was everything. So, and I will say for our straight allies in the room, I do apologize. The 40% that were gay actually had 60% of the sex. So, but sorry guys. That's just the way we boys are. So, how many at the end of 2 years, 32,000 episodes of intercourse, how many ended up positive? 0. Absolutely none. It shocked us all. We knew that lowering your viral load made you less at risk of passing on the virus. We had no idea. So Allison Rogers, this rather smart aleck man stood up and says, so, in your best estimate, what is our risk? And she said, sir, our best estimate is 0. If your partner is undetectable on his medicines, it's 0. So that, Pause Magazine put that on their cover, did a story, and the tagline that I like so much now, especially in a room full of positive people, is undetectable is the new negative. I love that. I also like to say that because what people don't realize, those of us who are HIV negative, once we do finally figure out a vaccine, we're all going to be positive. Just like I'm positive for hepatitis A, hepatitis B, measles, mumps, rubella, all the shots I got, I will be positive for HIV. And you have to think about that for a minute because all the stigma that goes into it is going to be exactly what gives us our answer when we finally do figure out a vaccine. So I just say that because, there are a lot of people, I'm so tired of seeing DDF on every, grinder, blender, Mr. Scrub, growler, all those things. I'm so tired. DDF, UB2. Oh, bite me. I don't understand. That really, really bothers me. Which brings me one other thing. I do like the CDC, the way they have changed. Now that Truvada is available, you can no longer call condomless sex unprotected. They have officially changed the language. You are having condomless sex, but you are protected because you are taking Truvada. So I like that as well. Again, words have power. And the lady there halfway back.
How long do you have to be on this bed before AIDS?
She wants to know how long do you have to be off your medicines before AIDS comes into the picture. Everybody is different. It really depends on your health, your genetic code, how you and HIV are getting along. And since this is coming from a black female, it reminds me of an exciting thing to tell you. As we try to work towards what is our functional cure, in Africa, oftentimes, you don't start medicines until your CD4 is below 250. So 2 women in KwaZulu-Natal end up positive. They're following them, waiting for their CD4s to drop, and then they'll put them on medicines. The interesting thing was their viral load kept dropping to the point now they have undetectable viral loads on no medicine. So we're trying to figure out how these 2 women, what happened in their genetic code that allowed them to be undetectable. Again, that might be one more piece towards a functional cure. We've had a lot of disappointments, and I saw your hand, I won't forget. We've had a lot of disappointments on the functional cure front. With the exception of Tim Berlin, who had HIV and leukemia, and the doctor in Germany decided I'll treat his leukemia with a stem cell transplant, which is pretty common. It's risky, so a high mortality rate, up to 90% of people die after that procedure. But we also know, and the lady in the middle mentioned it earlier, she alluded to a special kind of gene. It is called the Delta 32 mutation. And if you have that mutation on both the gene from your mom and your dad, you are immune to HIV. 0.6 of the world is immune to HIV. They cannot catch it because of that. If you have just one, you're highly resistant to it, and you're resistant to progressing to AIDS. So we know that, and so the doctor in Berlin found a donor from Scandinavia, which is where the Delta 32 mutation came from. We even know that now because it protected them from smallpox at the time. Yes, ma'am. Let me get one stopping point, and I'll get right with you. But I have a gentleman over here I need to ask first. So, they gave him the Delta 32 mutated stem cell donation, and it cured his leukemia, and it also cured his HIV. He is the only one that has been truly cured. The Mississippi baby, we had such great hopes that, that maybe if you hit hard and hit early that you could, reverse it. Unfortunately, as many of you know, after 25 months, the baby now has a detectable viral load. We also hoped that stem cell transplants that did not use the Delta 32 mutation would work. So 3 guys at Harvard with HIV also received stem cell transplants without the Delta 32. One of them died from the procedure. The other 2 have had detectable viral loads come back in less than 2 years. So we have that's a disappointment. We do know about the Visconti trial, which is a trial from France, where they took, I believe it was 83 or 84 patients who had been positive for 1 to 9 years and had been on their medicines and been undetectable for at least a year, and they all stopped their medicines. The only thing that they did was, if your viral load went up above 200, you restarted medicines. At the end of the trial period, there were still 14 who had undetectable viruses, and we don't know why. We're studying them. They have not rebounded at this point still, so we're trying to figure out, did they get hit hard and early with the medicines and just knocked it out and never got a chance to get stored into what we call the reservoirs, or did something else happen? So I'll stop there. Let me go here. And you had a question for me?
Yeah, I'm glad that you went into this. A lot of us look at Facebook, and one of the things that was brought up on my Facebook, I'm constantly looking at new cures and what the scientists are doing today. One of them, they brought up that they deleted the HIV cell in a cell. And I was just wondering if you had any more information on that. Have they figured out how to introduce this into humans, and where are they going?
The gentleman over here is mentioning there was some recent stuff on Facebook. You might have seen it. There's also an article that was in the New York Times, as well as at JAMA, our Journal of American Medical Association. In the lab, we have been able to take CD4 genetic code and reverse engineer out the HIV piece to effectively splice it out with gene therapy. We haven't done that in animals yet, or humans much less. So it's promising. We can do it, and on a very small scale, 1 cell at a time. We have no way to do it on a massive scale. We have something like 10 billion CD4s in our body, so this was done 1 cell at a time. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my question is, as far as the Truvada, have there been any tests ran as when you take the Truvada, does it affect any other STDs, or if you get another STD? What kind of effect would that Truvada have on it, or how will those other viruses work?
The lady in the middle was asking, does Truvada do anything to other STDs? And the answer is no. It is only an antiviral for HIV. It has no activity against anything else. That's one of the reasons that Truvada is always recommended with other safer sex practices. It is never recommended alone. So, this lady, and then there and there. Okay, yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to just ask this or reframe this in a way that maybe you could say this so we can remember this. You said something like, you all know about the Visconti trial, and it was 1 to 9 years, these people didn't name their viral load or something, and I'm sitting here saying, could you reframe? There were 2 sentences there that were really important about that.
Sure. The Visconti trial was a trial held in France where they followed 84 patients who were HIV positive on their medicines and undetectable. They had all had HIV for 1 to 9 years, and they were all undetectable for at least a year when they stopped the medicines in the trial. At the end of a 2-year period, 14 people were still undetectable on no medicines. So now we're trying to figure out, how did that happen? Did their immune system, maybe it's something like the KwaZulu-Natal ladies, maybe it's some other piece that goes into that. We're studying that now to figure out why, because we know with some people that works. And I believe, Josh, you were next, and then there was a lady.
You had said something at another presentation, stuff about the HIV and heart attacks, what do you call it, inflammation and stuff. and being on your medications and not, if you're infected and aren't on medication.
Oh, this is a great topic. There was a trial called the SMART study. Early on we were trying to figure out, these medicines were so toxic, can we maybe not take them all the time? At Chapel Hill we had something called the FOTO, F-O-T-O, which was 5 on, 2 off, so you just take it Monday through Friday, skip Saturday, Sunday. The SMART trial took it, and what they did was one group stayed on their medicines and stayed undetectable the whole time. The other group, as your CD4 got above 350, we stopped your medicines. When it got below 250, we restarted it. This sounded like a great idea, like just take them long enough to get your system boosted up. What happened we didn't expect. We didn't know this about HIV. We do now. HIV causes inflammation. And what I mean by inflammation, we release these little chemicals in our body that are actually sticky that make our blood more likely to clot and makes our organs more likely to hurt. So that's one of the reasons people don't seem to understand that, yes, this person has HIV, and yes, they're overweight because, they're doing so well. I don't understand why they hurt. It's not that easy.
It's not the aspirin kind of thing.
Right. It's a different kind of inflammation that aspirin can't take care of and Motrin can't take care of. And it's one of those things, it's also what triggers our brains to not function as well when we're HIV positive, because HIV hides out in our brains. The medicines we take don't really get into our brain very well. So there's always some virus up there causing those sticky chemicals. That's why it's more common, the longer you live with HIV, to have some neurocognitive disorder. And that's an area that, I oftentimes tell people, yes, maybe it's because you're aging, but also you're HIV and you're aging, so the incidence that is going to happen is pretty high. So back to the SMART study, 6 months into the trial, the group that had been starting had 3 times as many heart attacks and strokes, and so the trial was stopped. It wasn't ethical. That's when we first learned that HIV triggered these sticky chemicals that cause heart attacks and strokes. Before I get to you, Paul, I think there was someone in the back. All right. Yes. Ladies first, and then our pianist.
I just had 2 quick questions. One, if I wanted to find the study that you did for 2 years with the 1,140 people, if I wanted to find that, where can I find it? And 2, I know there's been a lot of information, but you had mentioned that people that being on Truvada, you have right now, what's the study you have right now? You have
Yeah, the numbers I gave you were just me telling you what my patients are. It's not a study, it's just me prescribing it for patients.
Okay, because I was curious, are those people eligible for ADAP and stuff like that? Because I know Truvada is expensive, so how does that weigh out?
That's a good question. ADAP is only for, you have to show a HIV antibody test. You have to show something that the person is positive in order to qualify for ADAP, so it would not cover that. There is a patient assistance program, and I think it's the same all over. It's 200% of the federal poverty level. If you make anything under that, you get the medicine for free. They have a copay card that gets you it for $200 a month. You get $200 a month off your copays if you have insurance. There also is they have an emergency need that Gilead has been very generous with. As far as meeting the cost otherwise, it can be challenging. I will only speak to our clinic. We are also a 340B clinic, which means we and pharmacies partner, and there is a profit the pharmacy shares with us, but the way the law reads is I have to use that only for patient care. I cannot use it for employees. I can't use it. I could build a building if I wanted it, as long as it was serving the patients. So what we do is we use that money to pay their copays and to help them pay their healthcare premiums, and we help people get Truvada. If you're in a committed relationship and you're already one of our patients, now if somebody new comes in, then we can't use it for that, but it has to be linked in some way to the care of HIV. So there are options.
Where do I find that study that you did?
The Visconti study.
No, the one that you said over 2 years, 1,140 people.
Oh, it's called the Partner Study. Just type in Partner Study in Google and it will pop right up.
No S.
No S. Partner Study. And, all right.
Yeah, we have I'm not going to name them, but 2 state health officials in Mississippi who have continually said in public settings, we don't use the word AIDS anymore. We only use advanced HIV disease. Now, I want to say that on the one hand, I think I understand a little bit where they're coming from, but I want to say on the other hand, those of us who have had AIDS diagnosis and have lived with AIDS diagnosis for 20-something years, it feels like we're being minimized. Our history and our journey is being reframed in a softer language. What's your take on that? And I just want to ask one little other question that's related, and that is the other thing that's continually being said that I think, in my opinion, doesn't feel right, and that is this soundbite of HIV is now a chronic disease. My thought is, well, maybe it could be treated like a chronic disease, it could be managed like a chronic disease. But what's your take on this language?
Again, and you bring up one of my points, and that's language. Words have power. To the first question the gentleman asked me was, how do I feel about us lessening the word AIDS because we're now calling it, the CDC doesn't use the word AIDS. When we do our medical, it's called ABC 123, and that tells me where your CD4 is and where it was, what your symptoms are and no symptoms. We use that for classification purposes. And I'm split on it because I don't want to take away the power that you've been living with AIDS for 20 plus years and you're doing so well. At the same time, the same reason we don't like to say infected anymore because it carries power, we now know that some people that were diagnosed with AIDS because their CD4 was below 200 or their percentage was below 14, but they popped right back up really fast and have never had a problem, we probably over-diagnosed them. They probably just had a momentary blip down. So I think part of it is, yes, there's AIDS, and then there is that transient AIDS, and there's no good way or good language right now. I look forward to how we could one day get to that point. I don't take away an AIDS diagnosis from anybody because to have lived 20-some years with AIDS is nothing short of a miracle to me. Some people believe there are no miracles. I think there are miracles every day. What I see happening in HIV is nothing less than a miracle. To the second question you have, and just flew out of my head. Oh, chronic disease. I do believe that HIV can be managed like a chronic disease, but think about it. How many of you in this room have told somebody that, I had cancer and it was fixed, or, I had a bad something, we just couldn't say the word. No other infection, pardon the word, or no other condition carries the stigma that HIV does. So I think, again, that whole mental health and substance abuse, we have to understand, especially as a young gay man from the South, I can tell you, many of us in this room who fit that same bill learn to lie and hide really early. Because, most of my, in Charlotte, we have something called Time Out Youth, which is where young people that are LGBTQ and everything else can go for a safe place. Over half of every teenage homeless person, they're there because their unconditionally loving Christian parents kicked them out because they wouldn't change and be straight. And I think that's an abomination to call that kind of, that's not Christ-like love to me. So you start out as a young man, and so you don't tell your parents because they'll kick you out, obviously. You don't tell your classmates because they'll beat you up. And in North Carolina, you don't tell your employer because you can be fired in North Carolina for just being gay or lesbian. And you don't tell God because he's going to fire you from heaven. Thankfully, when I figured out God was a woman anyway, I knew that wasn't going to happen. You learn how to hide. You learn subterfuge. The problem with that is it becomes a pattern that we have to break, because when you finally do get comfortable in who you are, oftentimes things have happened. That's one of the reasons there's such high substance abuse among MSMs. You got all this negative noise against you, especially in the South. So what do? When you finally realize that a drink of something, or a shot of something, or a snort of something, or a pull on a pipe, all of a sudden quiets those voices, and you can act on what's natural for you. Now, by the time you finally come into your full manhood or womanhood that God gave you anyway, and you realize my sexuality is just fine, you're saddled with a drug problem. And we all know we make bad decisions most of the time, or at some point when we're on something. So there's that substance abuse piece that plays a role in how they acquire HIV. Maybe you picked up HIV because you absolutely did no drugs, had no mental health problem, but you trusted somebody. And now you beat yourself up because you trusted somebody. And so that leads you down a path of depression. So then the depression leads you to make bad decisions. You pick up a bottle or you pick up a line of something. Those three, you cannot talk about HIV without putting those three together. So I share that with you because I'm sure many of you already know it, but many of our non-HIV allies do not understand or get that piece. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Sir. I'm sorry. Excuse me, sir.
Going to your situation about the PrEP. In the South, where does a patient go to obtain PrEP? Because in the South it seems as though it's an issue that if you're not HIV positive, then the ID doctor's not going to take you as a patient. And it is being left up to primary care physicians whether or not they feel comfortable with requirement issue. So is there going to be a list of physicians in the United States who are willing to treat patients who are not HIV positive with PrEP?
The gentleman over in the corner, for those of you who didn't hear, asked about how do you access PrEP here in the South, because it's hard to find it, and I absolutely agree. There is a challenge going on, and I hope once Gilead begins to advertise and promote Truvada as PrEP, that we will have some kind of network where you can go online and say Truvada in Pensacola, Truvada in Fort Walton, and you'll have a list of people you can go to. It is a challenge right now, and I will, as I said in the breakout group this afternoon, let me remind you that having a medical degree does not imbue you with compassion or a particular insight. Matter of fact, there's a lot of prejudice and a lot of I'll back off from there. There's just because somebody practices medicine doesn't mean that they have compassion, or they, so.
That's right. I was just going to say, since you've got a few minutes left, could we wrap up with kind of your message of hope for the future with research and what's going on?
Okay, yeah, I will wrap up now with the last little bit. Paul, I'll get yours, and then I'll wrap up. What you got?
I was going to say that when you go to the cocktail holiday, I went through my first medicine, which was highly toxic, and then went to a cocktail holiday, and then find out that the medicine I'm on now is not jumping me back up to where I was when I went to shop from 900 in 6 months. Now I'm still down below 200. And I don't want to go back to the other because I'm already cirrhosis and stuff like that. What are there future medicines that's going to be helping us from killing our liver and killing our
right. Paul's question is, he was on a regimen and he had really high CD4s, and because his liver decompensated, he had to be switched to another regimen after a period of being off, and his CD4s have never risen back up. Well, as anyone knows, as anyone who has had to do that, you know that your CD4s drop, and if you stay low long enough, what we call the original CD4s, the memory CD4s, die off. And then you don't have those blueprints to make enough. You've got some of the blueprints, but not enough of the originals. So that can happen. It's one of the reasons we like to get people on medicine and keep them on them and never take them off, because that really, the higher we get your CD4, the less likely you are to ever have any problems. And I'll give an example. If your CD4 is less than 50, that's end-stage AIDS, get right with Jesus. If you're alive and you had that and now you're up at 300, 400, 500, you need to feel blessed, because not many made it past that. Less than 100, that's advanced age, you still got problems. Less than 200, plain old age, we can work with that. Once you get above 350, you're in the low normal range for HIV negative people, but you're still at a little bit of risk for issues. If you get above 500, you're in the gravy zone. You're not going to have to worry about HIV stuff statistically. And if you get above 750, this is some of the newer data that's come out, your immune system begins to not only be strong, it reverses some of the previous damage. Gave him the strength to stay strong. She actually is who encouraged him to come out, because she saw what it was doing to the black community, and I admire the woman greatly. I've met them both, delightful people.
That's why I came out.
All right, Josh had asked me to sort of finish up on where we're going in the future. All right, you've heard a little bit about the functional cure. We're working towards it. We got lots of things we're trying. Nothing's quite fitting yet, so I don't think we're there yet. Maybe in a decade we might see that, but I don't really think we're there yet. As far as medications go, I think that's probably the most exciting thing. Our clinic is also participating in this trial. Everybody know what Depo-Provera is. It's a shot every 3 months to keep you from getting pregnant. We're now developing the same thing for HIV. It'll be a shot every 3 months. And for people who don't like to swallow pills, there's actually a word for that if you didn't know it. And it just flew out of my head. It's one of those phobia words. It's like phalabophobia. I have to go look that one up. I've forgotten what it is now. Anyway, for people who can't take pills, or maybe they're mentally challenged and cannot remember to take a pill, now they can come in every 3 months. The nice thing is they're also looking at that as pre-exposure as well. So we can give somebody a shot once every 3 months, and just like Depo prevents pregnancy, this will prevent HIV. So I'm very excited about that.
What if you already have?
Well, Once you, I mean, if you have HIV, then, you know, when this comes out, this can become your new regimen if you're, you know, if your virus is sensitive to it, the two medicines that are in there. And you probably know them, the drug Edurant, which is in Complera, and Tivicay, which is now in the newest one for the day called Trimec. Tivicay and Edurant are what's going to be in the injectable shot. So I think it's an exciting time that we're moving that way. I mean, think about it. It used to be you had to take 30-some pills a day, and some with food, some without food, some with water, some with this medicine, not this medicine. It was just crazy. And now it's a pill a day, and now we're getting ready to go to a shot every 3 months. I think it's quite amazing.
Yeah.
And my final comment will be that is our cure for this epidemic. Don't look for a vaccine. Don't look for a functional cure. The only way we're going to stem the tide of this epidemic is we're going to have to get everybody tested and everybody on medicine and normalize it. We have to remember that. And I get asked a lot, I speak at a lot of churches because you know, everybody has a different way of getting information, and especially in North Carolina, houses of worship among the black community seem to be where they enjoy getting their information most. And so I speak at a lot of churches. And I keep asking, you know, they ask me, has God healed anybody with HIV? And do you think God will heal people with HIV? And I say, you know, you're thinking about this body as if it's going to be going with you wherever you go after life. This body is going to get old and die. I promise you right now, everyone in this room living successfully with HIV, their soul, the only thing that will last, has already been healed of HIV. Remember that. Thank you guys for having me.